Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Sylvia and Peter. As you know, we are always on the coffee, and we are talking about various topics that are a lot or mildly relevant to mental health and well-being in the workplace and in life in general. And if you are still with me listening to what I'm saying, it's because you're paying attention. If you had dropped out already, you won't hear what I'm saying now because you've already left. So today is about attention, paying attention and keeping attention.
Hmm.
Attention span, attention for the right reasons, all that sort of stuff. And I was prompted to this conversation by something I read in the paper about children's books, that they are on the decline, they're getting shorter and shorter, kids are reading less and less. And some are blaming TikTok because the most popular clips on TikTok are somewhere between 12 and 24 seconds. So if you're forever watching TikTok videos, you train yourself to only pay attention to a very narrow time span. Whereas if you are reading a book or have a book read to you, you are trained into keeping attention for longer. I mean, I can remember from my childhood when we played Monopoly. That went on all day, and then we left it to go to bed and kept it and picked it up again the next morning on holidays and things. And we were kids, so we certainly had the attention span enough to do that. But according to that article, that doesn't happen anymore, whether that's a huge generalization or not.
Hmm.
But adults also struggle these days, I think, with attention.
Hmm.
What wonderful examples you've got on this kind of thing, Sylvia.
I find it rather sad, as you just said there, the article about kids and book reading. And perhaps because I'm older, you know, thinking back to when I was a kid, the joy of reading a book or having a book read to me was joyful and was a wonder. But it does seem to be something in, again, generalization perhaps, something about society at the moment and perhaps the influence of socials and snippets here and there on various socials, the attention span of children and adults. And I find it very interesting as to why that is. As you said, the training, you just look at this snippet, that snippet, this snippet, that snippet. I get that. But how does that affect particularly children going forward in their learning in schools and education, and then going into the wider world of the workplace, which we talk about a lot? When I was in the workplace, looking at lengthy documentation, lengthy emails explaining who does what to whom and when to make sure a transaction happens. If you don't read that email or read that documentation, and pay attention in the finest minute detail, the ramifications, the implications of missing something are huge. Financial, reputation, brand, and all those things. And whilst it might seem, looking at it through a telescope, people aren't paying attention to detail, the wider implications of that in our social environments, in the workplace environments, and also for me, one of the sort of personal things that I notice is, and personal gripe of mine, is if we don't pay attention to the detail, we tend to end up doing things 2 or 3 or 4 times.
Mhm.
And how many people say they are busy? Yeah, there's a lot of busyness, BUSYNESS. There's a lot of busyness, but what are we actually doing? A lot of the time, for me, it's going over stuff that's already been done. You send an email, someone comes back the response, haven't actually answered the question. You have to go back again. You order something, the wrong thing comes through. So you either have to take it for a refund, take it, every or, whatever, courier company, refunds. There's so much time and resources wasted simply for not paying attention to detail in the first place. And I think that's a place for me around, the implications of the attention to detail or lack of attention to detail or lack of attention and focus. End of.
It's funny you mentioned that, because in my past, when I did supply chain consultancy, we did a lot of work with factories and warehouses where a good standard manufacturing principle is right first time,
Indeed, yes.
where you plan your processes and the working methods to get it right first time. Because when you redo and do rework, you can't charge that to anybody. So that is very costly in terms of money and in terms of resources like human beings and machines and what have you, that are then tied up doing stuff again rather than producing something new. But what I also find frustrating is, from a lifelong having been an organized, well-organized person who can do attention to detail, is that I've always worked with a lot of people who do not have that skill, who do not have attention to detail. So it's all well and good saying focus on the detail, but not everybody can do that naturally. I'm not even going into the whole neurodiversity element of all of this, because we then end up talking for 5 hours, and nobody can keep their attention for that long on this particular topic. But it's there are frustrating things out there where people don't pay attention. So we can get everybody up to a level, and then some of us will have to pick up the last bit and make sure that it gets done properly. So what I'm just conscious about is that someone like you and I, who do have the ability to pay attention to detail, and for a long time, that we do often work with people who do not have those skills and do not have that inclination. So we have to figure out where are our strengths and how can we get to do what is then productive and profitable.
What I picked up there is, for example, you and I know the way we are, attention to detail and focus. At the same time, we can be very spontaneous and go all over the place, freedom, but it's developing that ability, what we call behavior flexibility, that if we are then working with someone who doesn't have that attention to detail and focus, how we then adapt to working with them, they're not expecting them to change their ways, because we recognize that it's something that's not their way of being for whatever reason, but we adapt to that to make sure that we connect and engage and build rapport and actually support them whilst they're going through whatever it is they're going through. But what is interesting is where does it come from, and again the why is that so? Is that because society, TikTok, social media? I have a friend, for example, I'll get a WhatsApp message from her. 2 seconds later, it's another message. 2 seconds later, it's another message. It's almost like as she's having these thoughts, you just fire them off. And it's actually then quite tricky, to then sit and look and what is it that she's asking? Do I need to do anything? Or is she just firing off some thoughts? It's paying attention to the detail in that way. Now, that's her way of being. It's not my way of being, but I still have to work with it. And it's really interesting how people's minds and brains are working these days, which is very different, because we are older, perhaps we've seen these changes. But it's then how do we adapt to this way of being in this world when people, say, coming back to, I'm so busy, I'm so busy, I'm so busy. Yeah, busy doing what exactly?
I just had a thought when you explained about those WhatsApp messages coming in all the time. I think what that person is doing is having a conversation with you, but not a verbal conversation. Because when we have a verbal conversation, we don't talk necessarily in long segments. It's about a little bit of this and a little bit of that, but you haven't got the opportunity to interject in between. So she's just firing all her thoughts at you. When we wrote letters, we sat down and we thought about what we wanted to write. We wrote it all and sent it in the mail with a stamp on it. Then we did that with emails or with a fax. Now we have instant messaging and ability to just fire back and forth our thoughts. So I think our conversation, our verbal conversation style has been transferred to a written medium. And if you are not engaged in right now we have a conversation back and forth, but we are writing, we're not talking, then someone like you would be bombarded with all sorts of a long string of more or less coherent messages that you then have to figure out, well, what does that mean?
Mm.
So did she or did she not have short attention span, or was she just rattling off her thoughts as and when she had them and then hit enter?
I think it's the latter.
Mm.
This is a friend of mine. Just rattles these things off. And what I picked up there was, the art of conversation, sending stuff off, not even waiting for what the other person's response is.
Mm.
This attention to detail, just paying attention to what they're firing off. There's no attention to what the other side is inputting. And I think that's also not just in that particular situation, but in general. You have an email, or you have a conversation even, and their attention is focused on what they want to say. They're not paying any attention at all to what's coming back, or to what actually the email or the conversation is actually asking the person. It's a bit like the skimming stones, when you chuck the stones, they hit here and they hit here and they hit here. The bit in between is the important bit, but there's no attention on that. So again, we have to go backwards and forwards. I think that's a very sort of interesting point about where we place our attention. My attention might be here, your attention might be here, in general. So when you have two people's attentions in a different place, it causes a bit of bother.
And also, this thing about what we pay attention to, we get more of.
Yeah.
And if you have a conversation or very often relationship issues are because people pay attention to themselves rather than the relationship, and that's when things start to go wrong. So it's a difficult one, because in your quick fire WhatsApp conversation, that wasn't really a conversation. Who paid attention to what? Your friend might have paid attention to what you wanted to say, and she was not really too bothered to wait and see what you would come back with.
Not at all.
Whereas you were paying attention to what you were going to respond to, and then another one pings and dings, and so that becomes quite confusing.
So what I tend to do now is wait until they've all finished,
Mm-hmm.
and then I respond to whatever one seems to be the one that she wants me to respond to. But it's quite challenging sometimes, because again, it's where we place our attention.
Yeah.
And that thing about you get where you pay attention to. Her attention might be just to get it out of her mind and her brain and onto a WhatsApp message. My attention is, so what is it that she's asking me? Is there anything I can do? What's going on here? It's but I think that's in a way indicative of so many people's conversations, not just on tech, but verbally as well. They'll fire off a question and then you go to answer it and they'll just say something else. You think, well, you haven't paid attention to the response at all. So how do you know what your next question is going to be if you haven't paid attention to what the answer is to your first one? It gets all very messy, doesn't it?
It is messy, and sometimes I get messy communication from my clients where I think, well, where was your mind when you wrote this or read my message? So back and forth a couple of times. But when I've got them in front of me in a session, their attention is there.
Mm.
So maybe it's to do with the medium, the conversation medium.
Mm.
If it's written, if it's text, we just fire them off, cost nothing these days. But when we sit in the same room or across the video conference, they are there.
Mm.
They pay attention, they answer the questions, they come up with their perspectives, and it's fine. So I think there's an awful lot about what situation people are in, what medium they're using. WhatsApp is a quick fire system, whereas a Zoom conversation for an hour is a completely different
Mm,
animal to deal with.
mm,
Sorry. So I just hope that you have managed to stay the course,
mhm,
paid some kind of attention to this conversation between Sylvia and I. And as always, we ask, what are your thoughts
mm,
on attention? What are
mm,
your war stories? What do you think we've missed?
mm,
And let us know what you think.
mm.
So
It'd be
thank you very much
interesting.
for your attention.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for your attention.
Take care. Bye for now.
Cheerio. Bye bye.